BHP Billiton's announcement today of corporate Australia's biggest ever half-year profit of more than $10 billion has reignited debate over the need to bolster the mining taxes on so-called super profits. The profit announcement coincides with the release of Treasury documents showing the federal government sacrificed $60 billion in forecast revenue when it reworked its proposed mining tax. This put the government on the defensive today, as did suggestions that another backdown on the mining tax may jeopardise election promises. Greg Hoy reports.
Records just keep tumbling in the profitability of major mining companies. Last week, Rio Tinto tripled its annual profit to $14.3 billion, and Xstrata announced a $6.6 billion profit. Today it was the world's biggest miner's turn, and BHP Billiton's half-year figures were mind-boggling and summarised to analysts as earnings before interest, tax and depreciation, or EBITDA.
Today we announced record results for the half year. Our underlying EBITDA was up 60% to $17.3 billion. Attributable profit was $10.7 billion before exceptional items, and that is up 88%.
It's great news for shareholders, with a massive $10 billion share buyback in total now planned for BHP Billiton. And as analysts predict, full-year profits may reach $25 to $30 billion this year, and even more next year. It was enough to reignite debate over the need for a greater super profits tax.
It's the Australian people's resources. These huge companies are going to export, in the case of BHP, some 40% of their profits. Rio, 70%.
The strong cash flow and healthy balance sheet meant that we were able to increase our interim dividend by 10% over the corresponding period.
The bottom line is that the super profits tax has been rejected by the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister and the Treasurer have rejected the Greens' position. What would have happened had the super profits tax come in is it would have delivered us an effective tax rate of 58 cents in the dollar. Now that is way over the top of Mount Everest of international tax rates.
It's not just the Greens, however, who've called for a return to consideration of a so-called super profits tax. Many others have criticised the handling of the mining tax negotiations by both the opposition leader who opposed any new mining tax and the Prime Minister who agreed to revise and reduce the tax rate.
When you allow for the 25% extraction allowance, which reduces that 30% down to 22.5%, that's a sellout to me.
If you're in oil and gas, there's a 40% resource rent tax. If you're in iron ore and coal, it's a 22.5% resource rent tax, but with credits for royalties. And if you're in copper, gold, uranium and other minerals, it's back to the old royalty system. Now, logic would say you should have the same system across all mines and energy stuff. This is just a hodgepodge, chaotic mess.
Such sensitivities were aggravated by projections released by the Treasurer's Office under Freedom of Information laws, which suggest the revised Minerals Resource Rent Tax, or MRRT, could collect $60.5 billion less over 10 years than the original super profits tax proposal.
The decent and reasonable thing is for the government to negotiate on this matter in these circumstances. There needs to be some clawback of a fundamental mistake in giving these huge mining corporations this $60 billion that should be going to the well-being of the Australian people now and in the future.
A 10-year projection is not one that you can necessarily say is wholly written. It's highly variable, highly subject to change. It's affected by a range of factors. Nothing new whatsoever in the figures that are floating around today. Last July, after we published the details of the MRRT, we said it would raise significantly less revenue.
But perhaps more sensitive for the Treasurer is whether revenues might be even lower for the mining tax, since a policy transition group, co-chaired by Resources Minister Martin Ferguson and former BHP Billiton Chairman Don Argus, recommended to the Treasurer at Christmas that the government give in to the miners on another bitter dispute.
If you can't trust government, who can you trust?
It's an argument over whether there was any agreement that all future rises in state mining royalties would be deductible from the new federal mining tax. The government originally categorically denied any such agreement was made.
Basically, we're back to yet another debate and consideration of what is good tax policy.
It now comes down to whether or not Julia Gillard wants to keep her word with the people she signed the deal with in such haste last July, August. The reality is, though, that this scheme is now disintegrating underneath the government.
When we put all of these proposals together, we looked at the medium term and we allocated revenue to the tasks that are very important for our country's future prosperity. Investing in the superannuation of low-income Australian wage earners, putting money into infrastructure, particularly in resource-rich states like Queensland and WA, and gradually bringing down the corporate rate. And that's what we're doing, and all of that's achievable.
But it's another battle brewing. The Treasurer has suggested if Cabinet agrees to roll over, allowing deductions of state royalties, as must be likely, states that do raise their royalties could be penalised in the allocation of GST revenues by the Commonwealth Grants Commission. Western Australia has said it would fight any such move. But tax analyst and economics professor at Melbourne University, John Freeban, thinks the Grants Commission would favour the government.
They divvy it up so that each state has roughly the same opportunity to provide health and education. And so as the royalty revenue goes up in Western Australia, their share of the GST goes down. And in fact, some people estimate if their royalty revenue went up $100, $80 of that 100 would be redistributed to the other states. That doesn't leave much of an incentive for the Queenslands and Western Australias to push up their royalty rate.
There's a lot more friction to come, it seems, on the mining front. Australian Workers' Union head Paul Howes is threatening vigorous industrial action against Rio Tinto over the pay rates of its workers in the wake of Rio's bumper profit announced last week. With each profit announcement for major miners in the foreseeable future likely to further inflame the mining tax debate.
That report from Greg Hoy.